Hi there, I'm Jim Mancuso, the Theological Librarian here at Rockbridge Seminary, with the last of 4 videos that I'm doing for you on how to do a research paper. I'm figuring that the last burning question in your mind, now that we've discussed why you have to do it, what goes into it, and how I find my sources, is how do I pull this all together? Well, I would say that my first piece of advice to you is getting over the hump of actually starting to work. And I'll give you a piece of advice. It's the same for everybody, even for me, maybe even for your professors. Whenever you're staring at a project that hasn't even been started, it looks overwhelming. That project could be cleaning out your garage, cleaning out your attic, or getting going on some major project for church. Whatever it is, a project looks impossible when you have the whole thing in front of you. So what I recommend you do is to get over that hump in some way. Set aside some time when you're not distracted by any of the other things that you need to do in your daily life and do something to start the paper. You could outline it, you could free write, you could go into the Rockbridge Library and start poking around for sources. You could sit down and talk to your pastor, your assistant pastor, your friend, your spouse, whoever it is, about your paper and have them take notes or you take notes about what you're saying. For instance, let's say that you're doing a paper and you keep thinking to yourself, I don't know, Mr. Mancuso told me I'm supposed to come up with a thesis statement, I don't know how to do that. Well, think about your paper, think about what it is that you're trying to prove. You should feel, what we say, passionate about it. It should matter to you. You should care about what it is that you're trying to prove. So start talking to someone, again, a spouse, a pastor, a friend, and have them interact with you a little bit about what it is that you're saying. Eventually, you will say the thesis statement, and that if that person is there listening, they're in tune to what you're talking about, they'll hear it come out. So for instance, let's say that you're doing a paper on youth groups, and let's say that you have had some bad experiences at your church with hiring someone to lead your youth group that comes from a completely different culture. Maybe you're in the Midwest and they come from the Northeast, or vice versa, and they don't know how to relate to the kids. It doesn't work out. A year and a half later, he leaves, you're frustrated, the kids feel abandoned. So let's say that you're thinking to yourself, if we have a youth group leader next, I want it to be someone in the church. We'll pay him a quarter time or a third time, and he's going to be our new youth leader. He's been in the church for 20 years, and maybe there's this guy Dave that just really relates to the kids, and the kids love him already, and he loves those kids, and they know that, and that's important to them. Okay, so let's say that you want to do your research paper on something like that. If you start talking about that with someone, and they're saying, what are you going to get a thesis statement out of this? At some point or another, you're going to make a statement like, youth group pastors should be chosen from among the members of their own church, because using that model, you would have someone who really cares for the children, and that's the most effective way to do it. My goodness, you did it. You just said your thesis statement. That's how you do it. That's a natural way to come up with a thesis statement. You talk about your paper. Talk about it with someone that cares about you and wants to see your paper succeed. You've just gotten over the hump of it. What about the introduction? Well, sometimes I've seen some people write the introduction first, and sometimes I've seen it come last. But once you have a thesis statement, you know what you're trying to prove. So if you understand that the paper has a lot of pieces to it, and that you can do those pieces one at a time, that'll help you too. One of those pieces is doing the research. But that might not all happen the first day. In other words, you might go in the Rockbridge Library, find 5 journal articles, you talk to your pastor, he hands you a book, you talk to somebody else you know in your church, she hands you another book. All of a sudden you've got 6, 7, 8 sources pulled together. Maybe you go into Google and you very successfully search your paper out, find a website that has all kinds of information. Hey, that's great. You've started to get the resources together. Lay aside some time in your schedule to read those, and then think about them for a few days. Give yourself time to just sleep on it and do something different. Come back to the sources, look at them again, reread them. You'll see something that you missed the first time. It'll also give you time to think about what you've read and to come up with a new angle, a new way of looking at it, That's part of the research process. You might find that you need another book. You might find that in doing your paper, you're thinking to yourself, well, this proves this and this proves this, but I really need another book to prove another point. So you go back into a library, maybe you have a Christian library near you, and you find another book on it, or you find another journal article, whatever it is. In other words, the research process is not fully linear. Sometimes you go back and repeat a step. Sometimes you're writing the paper and you're setting out to prove one thing, and you decide to prove something that's very close to it, but not quite. In which case, you might need to reword your thesis statement. You might need to tweak it a little bit. Well, that's okay. Everybody does that. It's quite natural. Your bibliography is something that should be coming together little by little as you're working through the paper. So for instance, as you're finding each source, you're creating a card, if that's the way you want to do it, or a few lines in a WordPerfect document. However it is, maybe you jot things down in a spiral notebook, whatever works for you. You keep track of each one of your sources. And as you put your bibliography together at the end, you put them all in alphabetical order by the author's last name. And then you've got your bibliography done. Typing it up is something that you should do when you're well rested, not distracted. The writing of the paper is the hardest part. You need to do that when you are fully able to concentrate on what you're doing. If you build a lot of distractions in, such as you can only write for 10 minutes, then you have to jump up and do something else, come back to it an hour later, you probably won't be very effective. So whatever way you know you've worked well in the past, keep note of that and give yourself ample time to put this all together. Thinking about the project one piece at a time, again, will really help you to keep from feeling overwhelmed. You could ask your professor for help along the way if you need to. There may be other interactions like with your mentor or your pastor. Somebody else may be able to give you a tip. Sometimes when you're doing the writing of it, you may just get really stuck and you're thinking, I don't know how I want to say this. Give it to someone else and have them help you. Another great piece of advice is finish your paper in plenty of time to be able to print it out, hand it to someone else who knows you fairly well and wants you to succeed at this, and have them read it for you. They'll find missing words, they'll find misspellings, they'll find an argument maybe that doesn't make sense. They may be reading along and say, this paragraph needs to be a lot longer, this needs to be bigger. I don't understand what you're saying here, but if you just expand on it, then I'll get it. Or they may say, you went off on a tangent on this page, you could throw this whole page out and put in something better. If you've given yourself enough time, you can go back and do that editing, and then you'll be very proud of the project. So, thanks very much for listening. This was the last of the 4 videos. I hope this was helpful. Again, email me if I can be of any assistance to you in doing your research paper. Thanks. Bye-bye.